Hi guys, welcome to your lesson on 11.1 on finding measures of central tendency and dispersion. Central tendency and dispersion really, I mean, they seem like fairly intimidating words here, but central tendency basically says the numbers, the statistical values around the middle of your data, all right? And then the word dispersion basically just talks about how your data is spread out, okay? So in chapter 10, we talked a little about probability, and in chapter 11, now we're going to start talking about this idea of statistics. So you have these statistical things that we're going to maybe survey people or collect data somehow, and so we're going to be looking at some statistical things in the first part of chapter 11 here, okay? All right, so some vocab to start off with. First of all, statistics. Statistics is numerical values used to summarize and compare sets of data. So we collect a bunch of statistics on some set of data, and then we somehow compare those statistics, maybe talk about them, look at charts, all that kind of stuff. And so that's really what statistics is all about, is looking at numerical values and how it summarizes information, okay? Measures of central tendency. You guys are familiar with these already. We represent the central tendency by three things: the mean, the median, and the mode. We'll talk more about what those are in just a few minutes here, but those should be words that are familiar to you. Now, the measure of dispersion says it's a statistic that tells you how dispersed or spread out your data is. All right? So that's all it is. A measure of dispersion is how your data is spread out. Now, something that we use mathematically to talk about that dispersion is something called standard deviation. Okay? Standard deviation is a measure that describes the typical difference or the deviation, again, typical difference or deviation, from a data value and the mean. Okay, so how is the data spread out? How is each data point spread out between that value and the mean, the average of the data? All right, and then we have these things called outliers. Sometimes your whole data set consists of, a whole bunch of numbers that are around the 50s, and all of a sudden you have one random outlier where, you have some number that's way down in the 20s. So maybe on a test, for example, you have a whole bunch of students that scored in the 70s, and then you have one outlier, that one student that scored 100%. And again, so their data helps to maybe potentially skew the data, and we'll look at how outliers skew data here shortly. So some definitions, some vocab, hopefully that makes sense to you. Let's go ahead and take a look at what are some of these measures of central tendency. All right. First and foremost, the mean is also referred to as the average. Okay, so we talk about mean by saying the word average. Of n numbers is basically the sum of the numbers, and then we divide it by the number of numbers. Okay, you guys know how to take an average, so this should be nothing new to you. Okay, mean is another way to say average. The mean is denoted by x over with a little bar over x, and so we read that as x bar. So when we talk about mean, sometimes you'll hear us talk about it as x bar. All right. So to find x bar, basically we add up all the data values, x1 plus x2 plus x3, and so on and so forth, all the way up to x of n, and we divide by the number of terms we have, which in this case is n. Okay. The median of those numbers is basically the middle number. So if I have a whole data set of numbers, the median is the middle number. Now, what happens if you have an even number of numbers? If you have an even number of numbers, then there's two numbers in the middle. So all we do then is we take the average of the two numbers in the middle, and that tells us our median. Sometimes they're both the same number, all right? And that's okay. All right, the mode of a set of numbers is basically the number that occurs the most frequently. I can spell frequently. There we go. Or most often. How's that? So sometimes there might be just one mode. Okay, sometimes there's one number that appears more than once. Maybe there's one number that occurs 5 times, and the rest of them all occur like once or twice or 3 times. Sometimes there could be no mode. Okay, maybe there's every single number appears exactly once. That would be an example where there'd be no mode. Okay, and then sometimes there's more than one mode. Because this would be a situation where maybe you had a couple of numbers that both repeated 3 times. Well, now there'd be 2 modes. And they don't even have to really be in the middle of the data set either. Okay? All right, top of the next page. We're going to be using our graphing calculator a lot for this lesson because we don't want to actually calculate some of these things on our own. Now, it's not to say that we can't calculate the average of these numbers, all right? But we can use our calculator to do this a whole heck of a lot better. So in the first example here, to find the mean, we would simply add up all of these numbers. It'd be 15 plus 17 plus 17 plus 17 plus 18, blah, blah, blah. And we would divide that by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers. Okay, so add them all up and divide by 9. Okay, when I add up all the top, I get 171, so 171 over 9, and that comes out to 19. So the average of that set of numbers is 19. Okay? The median is the number in the middle. So conveniently, they put those numbers in order for us. So the number smack in the middle is 18, and the mode is 17 because you can see the number 17 occurs the most frequently in Class A. For Class B, the mean becomes 16 plus 18 plus 19 plus blah, 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 blah. And then we're going to divide that by 9 because we have 9 terms. Again, once again, we have 9 terms. And so this comes out to 189 divided by 9. So here we have an average of 21. All right, so this is the average on a quiz. Looks like Class B did a little bit better than Class A because they have a little bit higher average. In this case, the median is the number smack in the middle. And so the median score for Class B is a 22. And then the mode is the number that appears the most frequently. In this case, you have the number 22 appearing 3 times. And so the mode is 22. All right? Now, we're going to go ahead, and I want you guys to make sure you wrote down those numbers up above because we're going to come back to those in just a few minutes here. All right? The standard deviation, then, to calculate the standard deviation of a data set. Okay, standard deviation of a data set, the long way to do this is take the difference between each x value and the average, and then square it. All right? x2 minus x bar and square it. x3 minus x bar and square it. And so on and so forth, all the way up to xn minus x bar and square it. And then we're going to divide that by the number of terms. Okay? Now, standard deviation, that little symbol right there, we say sigma. All right? And that's a Greek letter, sigma. All right? And that Greek letter sigma represents standard deviation. All right? Okay. And so we're going to take a look at range and standard deviation. Range is just the difference between the highest and the lowest. Okay? To find the range of the data, we subtract high minus low. All right? Now, we're not actually going to do standard deviation manually because there's a much better way to do that. So a better way to do this then is to use our graphing calculator. And so if you turn on our graphing calculator, we're going to press the stat button. Okay? Now, in the stat menu, you're allowed to enter a couple of different sets of data. All right? We can add up to 6 sets of data, I believe. So under the edit option, we want to go ahead and edit. Now, I've already taken the time to put in Class A and Class B. So in the first list then, we want to take Class A and I want to put the values for those data points in Class A. All right? Class B, the same thing. We're going to put those data values in list number 2. All right? Now, our calculator will allow us to calculate some one-variable statistics, things like mean, median, and mode, central tendency, and also we can get things like standard deviation. All right? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, look, hit stat, okay, which is going to be right here on your screen. Okay, we're going to have, whoops, let's try that again. Hit your stat button, which is right here on your screen, and once you press your stat button, you're going to scroll over to calculate. We want to calculate one-variable statistics. Okay, one-variable statistics. Now, we want to do Class A first, so we want to tell it that we want the first data set. So if we press second and then L1, you'll see up above the number 1 right there, there's an L1. All right, so I want to press second and then L1 to get up to that L1, and then I press enter. Okay, now up above, we found out that the mean, the average x bar was 19. Well, that's what we found here. All right, we said there were 9 terms. And if I scroll down below, you can see this arrow here that says there's more information down below. Up above, we found out that the median of the first class was 18, and we also found out that the mode was 17. Now, we can't see the mode from the graphing calculator. That one, you just kind of have to take a look at the data set, and you can see that the 17 occurs the most frequently. All right? So, a couple of things that we want to take a look at. If you take a look at here, it tells you the minimum and the maximum values for my data set. So to calculate the range, we simply go high, take away low, and so the range of my data is 10. Okay, so I'm not exactly getting it. It doesn't come right out and say that the range is this, all right? This Q1 and Q3 have to do something with quartiles, which we won't be talking about in this class. Now, the standard deviation, what we said before is we would take the difference between 15 minus the average, which is 19, square that, and then the next one would be 17 minus 19 and square that, and so on and so forth. But I'm not going to do it that way. On my graphing calculator, you can scroll back up, and remember I told you sigma, right here, sigma represents standard deviation. All right, so as you can see, you have sigma. Sigma of x, basically the standard deviation of the data set x, is 2.94. And so that's a far cry from doing all of that manually. I'm just going to put the standard deviation as 2.94. All right, so let's try that again. Let's go ahead and clear that out of our screen. Oops, clear that out of our screen. And again, let's go under our stat menu. We want to calculate one variable statistics on my second class. So second, L2, press enter. And that tells me once again that my average is 21. Down below, it will tell us the median. Again, we found up above that the median was 22. See that right there? The median is 22, and that's what we found out up above on your page. Okay? Now, it also tells us the minimum and maximum values. So the maximum value is 25, the minimum value is 16, and so therefore my range becomes 9. Okay? Again, we're not going to manually do standard deviation. Instead, we go back to our graphing calculator and we scroll back up, and it tells us that sigma of x is 2.701. So my standard deviation is 2.7. All right? So what does that tell us? It tells us that my standard deviation of the first set of data was 2.9, and it had a range of 10. In the second data set, my standard deviation is 2.7. So the average distance between each point in the mean is 2.7, and the average distance from each point in the mean is 2.9. That says that this data set is more spread out, has a larger range, and a larger standard deviation. All right? And so Class A, let me move my calculator here. All right, Class A has their test scores that are more spread out, okay, because they have a higher standard deviation. All right? Okay. Let's go ahead and try an example on the top of the next page. Let's take a look at what happens when we throw an outlier in our data set. Okay? So, the winning scores from the first 9 games of a soccer season are given. It says find the mean, median, mode, range, standard deviation of that data set. All right? Now, the first thing is we want to type those numbers into our graphing calculator. All right? And then we'll come back and we'll examine this data set. All right? So back on our graphing calculator, what we really want to do here is we want to go back under the stat menu, and we're going to clear out those 2 data sets. So I'm going to go to edit, and if I go up to L2 and I simply hit clear and press enter, it's going to wipe out that data set. Same thing with L2, I'm going to hit clear, with L1 rather, and it's going to clear out that data set. Now for right now, I'm going to pause my recording and type those numbers, because it's a lot faster for me to type those in from my keyboard rather than try to do them on the calculator here. Okay? So I've already typed my data set in. Now, to find the mode, well, to find the mode, you just need to find the number that occurs the most frequently. It looks like we've got the number 3 occurring 3 times. Now, sometimes it's easier to find the mode if you sort the data. So if you go under Stat and go down to Sort A, that says we're going to sort the list ascending. And we want to sort L1. So second, L1. Go ahead and put your end parenthesis in there, and it's going to sort list 1 ascending. Okay? So if I go back to Stat and back to Edit, you will see your set of data that is in order. And once again, you can see the number 3 appears the most frequently, and so that becomes my mode. All right? All right, so other things that we need to get. We need to get standard deviation, range, all that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and see if we can't get some of that. So once again, we're going to press Stat. We're going to calculate one variable statistics on list number 1. Okay? So over here, we find out that the average, we can add all that stuff up and divide by 9, and then find out our average is 3. Our median is our middle number, and if you scroll down below, which I won't do that right this second, but I'll show you in a second, the median is 3. The mode we set is 3. The range is 5 minus 1. Whoops. 5 take away 1, which is 4. All right, and so you get all of that stuff down below here. Once again, it tells you the minimum and the maximum. So 5 is my max, 1 is my minimum, so 5 minus 1 is 4, and it also tells us my median right there. All right? Now, what else do we have to get from that? We also have to get the standard deviation. It sure beats the pants out of doing that manually to just use the calculator to get the standard deviation. In our case, it tells us the standard deviation is 1.15. All right? Now, what happens to that data set when I throw in one outlier? Okay, now the winning score from the next game is an outlier. We scored 9 goals in the next game. So we're going to add another number here to the end. All right, and let's see what happens to our data when we do that. So under Stat, we're going to go back to Edit. And we're going to go to the bottom of that list. And we're going to put in an additional game, game number 10, where we scored 9 goals. All right, now I'm going to have to move some stuff on the screen here. All right, for the next set of data, okay, what we now have in our next set of data is that we're we'll go to stat. And now the data is already in order because the 9 is on the end, right? So let's go ahead and calculate our one variable statistics on that list number 1. And it's going to spit us back now that my average is bumped up to 3.6. All right. My standard deviation is given as 2.10. My median value, which we'll get in a second, my mode is still 3 because 3 is still the highest value in the highest frequency item in the chart. Now, my high score is 9 and my low score is 1. And so therefore my range becomes 9 take away 1, which is 8. And my median is given here as 3. All right? Now, what are the things that were affected by the outlier? You'll notice that the mean was highly affected. We had an average of 3, now we have an average of 3.6, so we affected our average score by having one game off the charts. The median and the mode were not really affected at all, right? And then the outlier caused both the range and the standard deviation to increase. Because basically what happened, we spread our data out some more. All right? Okay, so top of the next page, there are some checkpoint problems. Okay, we'll have you go through those 3 checkpoint problems. We'll have solutions for you, but go ahead and try those 3 checkpoint problems again. We'll be right back with a solution. So I've taken the time to go ahead and put in the data set. I've already put in the speeds of the 10 cards. We want to find mean, median, and mode. Okay, so obviously the mode is the one that occurs the most frequently. It looks like we have the number 63 only once. We have the number 64 2 times, 3 times. So 64 looks like that occurs the most frequently. So it looks like our mode is 64. Okay, our mean, or x bar, and our median. Now, you can't find median unless you put the numbers in order. Okay, so there's 2 ways to do that. You can use the calculator to put them in order. Stat, sort ascending, list number 1. And it's going to sort the list. And then if you go back under stat and edit, you can say, look, it's 10 numbers, so we want to find the middle number. Well, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it would be the average of 64 and 64, which in our case is 64. Another way to do that is to go to stat, calculate, one variable statistics on list number 1. And if you scroll down below, you will find then that the median for this set is given as 64. Okay, what about the mean? What about the average? Let's go up above, take a look at the average. Let's look for x bar. And it looks here like x bar is equal to 64. So in this case, all of them are equal to 64. How about the range and the standard deviation? Well, once again, let's go down to the bottom of the chart. Let's get those values from down below. All right, my maximum value is 69. My minimum is 60. So 69 minus 60 becomes 9. So my range is 9. And then my standard deviation, sigma, okay, is given up above in the chart, and that becomes, looks like 2.45. Okay, so we'll call it 2.4. Oops, need to move the calculator so I can write this down. Okay, so this is 2.4. All right? Now, in the next piece then we say, all right, well, what happens if we add an outlier? You got a car that's got some car problems, all right? And this car is having some difficulty, so now we're going to throw in one more car that now has a speed of 36 miles an hour. So now I go ahead and I add that last car that's now going 36 miles an hour. That's going to affect, potentially it might affect the median, potentially it might affect the mode. We're going to move some numbers around a little bit. But let's go ahead and see if we can, well, first of all, the mode isn't going to change, right? The most frequent item still in here is still going to be 64, all right? So my mode is equal to 64. That doesn't change. Okay, my median and my average may be affected, so let's deal with that in a second. Okay, my range is going to be high minus low, which we'll deal with in a minute. And finally, the standard deviation, my sigma, standard deviation of that data set, I'll want that as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if we can't get some of that. Again, stat, calculate, one variable statistics on list number 1. All right, and let's just kind of put this stuff in order as it appears on the screen here. First of all, the average becomes 61.45, and as you can imagine, if you have one car going slower, that's going to reduce the average. Okay, standard deviation is given as 8.38. My data is way more spread out than it used to be. All right, before my standard deviation was only 2.45. Scrolling down below here on my chart, okay, it tells me that the range is 69 minus 36, and 69 minus 36 comes out to 33, so there's my range. And finally, my median is given, it's still 64. All right, so that concludes lesson 11.1.